A few years back, I landed a job as a night shift attendant at a small motel off the main highway. The job was simple and quiet, perfect for someone like myself who enjoyed solitude. My shifts were from 10 till 6, and most nights were pretty quiet. The motel was usually half empty, mostly visited by truckers or tired travelers looking for a quick rest. That night, the rain seemed to have deterred most travelers. It was around 2 hours into my shift, and I was preparing for a long, uneventful night when a car pulled into the parking lot. The car looked expensive and seemed out of place in the modest setting of our motel. A well-dressed man stepped out, his coat pulled tightly around him against the pouring rain. He hurried into the lobby, shaking off the cold. His demeanor was rushed, and he seemed anxious. He requested a room for the night, no specifics, just something quick. I assigned him a room and handed over the registration form for him to fill out. As he filled it out, I noticed his hands were shaking. He caught me looking and forced a smile, but his eyes were wary, almost scared. I handed over the key to his room and wished him a good evening. About an hour passed, and I saw someone outside in the rain, checking out the expensive car in the parking lot. A few minutes later, a tall man entered the lobby, soaking wet. He came up to the counter and, without any pleasantries, asked if a man had checked in recently. His tone was gruff and demanding. Something about his demeanor set off alarm bells in my head. I decided to play it safe and told him I couldn't give out information about our guests. He scowled, muttered something under his breath, and left, but not before giving the car outside another long, hard look. I'm not sure where he came from, but he didn't have a vehicle and just walked off out in the rain. After he left, a sense of unease settled over me. His interest in the well-dressed guest and the expensive car had raised too many questions. I decided to check on the guest for peace of mind. Leaving the front desk, I made my way to his room. I knocked on his door but received no response. I called out, but again, nothing. With growing concern, I used my master key to unlock the door to see if he was all right. The room was dark, so I flicked on the light switch. It appeared barely touched. The bed was still made, and there were no signs of the guest's belongings. The window was open, letting in the rain, creating a puddle on the floor. It looked as if the guest had left in a hurry, but why? And more importantly, where had he gone? I hurried back to the lobby, my mind racing with possibilities. Had he been scared off by the tall man? Was he in some kind of trouble? I checked the parking lot and saw that his car was still there. If he had left, he hadn't taken his car. Feeling it was my responsibility, I called the police. They arrived quickly despite the storm, and I explained everything, from the guest's anxious arrival to the encounter with the tall man and the guest's subsequent disappearance. The police took my statement and began their investigation. They searched the surrounding area but found no trace of the missing guest. His car was searched and revealed nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual travel items one would expect. In the days that followed, the police returned with more questions, but there were no answers. The guest had vanished, leaving behind only questions and his abandoned car. His identity, too, was a mystery. The information he provided at check-in led nowhere, and the car was apparently a rental. The local newspapers picked up the story, casting a spotlight on our small motel and the mysterious disappearance. People came up with various theories. Some believed he was running from someone or something. Others speculated he might have been involved in illegal activities. But without concrete evidence, these theories remained just that, speculation. A few months went by, but I didn't hear anything else about the case. I don't know if they found the guest or the man that was looking for him. I soon quit my job at the motel, so his disappearance remained a mystery to me till this day. I have been a food delivery driver for a while, having worked for several fast food chains and restaurants, but there's one delivery that stands out in my memory. It was a cold and rainy evening in late autumn, and I picked up a pretty big order for a delivery to an area I'd never been before, far on the outskirts of town. The address was for a secluded house, set back from the road and surrounded by dense woods. I drove out, following my GPS as the city lights faded behind me. The road became narrower and darker with no streetlights around. Finally, I reached the address. It was an old farmhouse, isolated and looking like it hadn't seen much care in years. I found this a bit odd. It was unusual for someone so far out to order delivery, but I didn't think too much of it at the time. I grabbed the food and made my way quickly to the front door, trying not to stand in the rain too long. The house was dark, which was strange considering they were expecting a delivery. I knocked and waited. No response. I knocked again, louder, but still nothing. Just as I was about to leave, I heard a noise from behind the house. Curious, I walked around the side of the farmhouse, thinking maybe the customer was out back. That's when I saw a light on in a shed a short distance from the main house. Approaching the shed, I could hear voices inside, low and urgent, but I couldn't make out the words. I called out, announcing the food delivery, but the voices stopped abruptly, and the light went out. Something didn't feel right. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. Then I decided to head back to my car. As I turned to leave, I saw someone moving in the shadows near the farmhouse. I stopped, straining my eyes to see in the dim light. It was a man, watching me from the darkness. I couldn't see his face, just his silhouette. I called out to him, asking if he'd ordered food. He didn't respond, just kept staring at me. Feeling a growing sense of alarm, I started to walk back to my car, keeping my eyes on the man. He didn't move, just continued to watch me. I jumped in the car, locking the doors as soon as I was inside. I took one last look at the farmhouse. It was pitch dark now, the light in the window gone, and the figure I saw was no longer there. I felt a rush of fear and confusion. Who was that man? Why didn't he respond? Just before I drove off, another car approached. I recognized it. It was one of the other delivery drivers on shift with me at the time, Carlos. He parked next to me. I rolled down the window and asked him what he was doing here. Carlos said that there was another large order received for this address shortly after I left, so he's delivering it. I got out and hopped in his car to get out of the rain. I told him about what I had seen when trying to deliver the first order, and he got a bit freaked out too. Both orders were for nearly $300 in total, so the boss would have been pretty pissed if we just left. We decided to call the customer. Some guy picked up and Carlos told him we're at the front with the orders. He told us to bring them to the shed just behind the house and hung up. We hesitated, sharing a look of uncertainty, and made our way to the shed in the rain. We knocked, and after a few seconds the door swung open. Two men were standing inside with medical masks on their faces, and one of them holding a shotgun pointed at us. The other told us to empty our pockets and leave everything we had on us on the ground, including our car keys. We quickly complied, giving them everything we had. The two men then came out of the shed, whistled, and 3 more men came out of the house carrying large boxes. They all got in our cars and drove off. We couldn't believe what just happened. We walked in the rain to the nearest house we could find, knocked on the door and asked the homeowner to phone the police for us, explaining what had happened. Once the police arrived, they took our statements and one of the officers drove us back to the restaurant, while the other units went to the house to investigate. A few days later, we were notified by an officer that our cars were found abandoned 2 states over, but they weren't able to locate and apprehend the suspects. When they checked out the farmhouse, it had been robbed. Later, we heard rumors that the owner had valuable items in that house like gold, jewels, and money, which is what we assumed was in the boxes. I guess they made the 2 orders so they can steal our cars and make their getaway, but none of this was confirmed by the police, so it's just speculation. Needless to say, the restaurant changed its policy on delivering large orders to unknown and isolated houses. Last year, I decided to take a solo camping trip in my old RV. It had been a while since I used it, so I figured it was time to hit the road again. The destination was a remote, untouched forest that I had heard about from a friend. He had warned me that it was quite isolated, but I craved the solitude. He mentioned a lake and an old dirt road that led to it, on the edge of the forest. The location was quite far from my house, so I drove through the day and made it just before dusk. As I parked the RV at the edge of the forest near the lake, I couldn't help but admire the peaceful surroundings. It was the perfect setting for some much-needed relaxation. The first few days of the trip were really nice. I explored the woods, hiked the trails, and lounged by the campfire watching the sunsets. But on the 4th night, that peacefulness turned to terror. It was my last night before I headed back. It had started raining earlier, and I was alone in my RV, reading a book and drinking some tea. The only source of light was a dim lantern hanging from the ceiling. Just when I was about to turn in for the night, I heard a faint tapping on the RV's window. I chalked it up to a tree branch or maybe even a small animal, but the tapping grew louder and more insistent. I put my book down, dimmed down the lamp, and pulled the curtain to look through the window. I couldn't see anything except darkness and rain falling down. I stayed silent for a few minutes, while listening intently for any other sounds. All I could hear, though, was the sound of rain and rumbling thunder in the distance. I returned to my book, and about 30 minutes later, I was startled by a knock on the door of my RV. My stomach dropped. It was the middle of the night, and I was in a very remote location, away from everything. There were no other RVs or cars near me, so I couldn't think of a rational explanation why somebody would be there knocking on my RV. I sat in my chair and didn't make a sound, hoping whoever it is would go away. All of a sudden, I heard them trying to open the door. I didn't know what to do in that situation and was starting to panic, so I said, "I have a gun in here, buddy. You better go away." They immediately stopped trying to force the door open, and I felt a moment of relief. I didn't actually have a gun with me, but I was glad that my bluff paid off. I quietly made my way to the front of the RV to look through the window. I pulled aside the curtain, and my heart leaped into my throat. There, pressed against the glass, was a face. It was a pale, emotionless face with hollow eyes, staring at me. My body froze. My first instinct was to start the RV engine and get out of there, but as I looked further out, there were 2 cars blocking the dirt road I came on. As I watched in terror, the face moved away from the window and went towards the cars. The fear I felt was immense. I picked up my phone, and just as I was about to call the police, I heard several car doors closing. I peeked outside the window and saw 4 men approaching my RV. I decided that I wasn't going to take any chances with them, so I started the RV and drove towards the tall grass, which was next to the dirt road. By some miracle, I didn't get stuck and managed to go around their cars. As I looked in my side mirror, for some reason, they didn't chase me. I guess that they didn't expect me to start driving, and whatever they were planning was not worth it anymore. They were obviously not afraid of me having a gun, so whatever their intentions were, it couldn't have been anything nice. I made my way back to the main road and then got onto the highway. I drove all night, while being paranoid and scared of every car passing me on the highway, that it could be them. This actually happened a week ago, on Halloween night. I was at a house party with my friend Isabel. It was raining heavily that night, and we had been drinking, so we ordered an Uber to drive us home. As soon as we got into the car, I noticed the driver was a bit too friendly. He introduced himself as Mike and started making casual conversation. At first, it was just small talk about the party and the weather, but then he began making flirty comments. Isabel and I exchanged uneasy glances but tried to brush it off, thinking we'd be home soon enough. As we drove, Mike's comments became more personal and inappropriate. He asked me if I had a boyfriend and then said that he wouldn't let me go out wearing such a costume if he was my boyfriend. For context, I was dressed as Barbie. He kept glancing at us in the rearview mirror with a look that made me increasingly uncomfortable. I texted Isabel saying that this guy was really creepy, but she just brushed it off, saying that he's probably just bad at picking up girls. Soon after we arrived at her house, I gave her a quick hug and watched her go inside. As we drove toward my house, the car was eerily quiet. I kept my phone in my hand, ready to call someone if things escalated. He tried making some more small talk, but I answered most of his questions with yes or no. When we arrived at my house, I quickly got out, not even bothering to say goodbye. My parents were on vacation, so I was alone. I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. Peeking through the window, I saw that Mike's car was still parked outside. My heart started racing. I checked again a few minutes later. He was still there. I texted Isabel, telling her what was happening. She told me that I was overreacting, and he was probably waiting to get another pickup. An hour passed, and Mike's car hadn't moved. I couldn't understand why he was waiting outside. It was around 2 a.m. at that time, and I started getting really uncomfortable. The rain was pouring hard when I suddenly heard a knock on the door. I froze, and my heart was pounding. I waited quietly for a few seconds, hoping whoever it was would go away. Then there was another knock, and someone called out,
"Hey, it's Mike, your Uber driver. You left your jacket in my car."
I stayed quiet, thinking to myself that that was impossible because I didn't have a jacket with me in the car. He stopped knocking, and I finally decided to call the police. I explained the situation, and the dispatcher said they'd send a car out ASAP. As I waited, I heard a loud thump at my back door. I started getting even more anxious and felt like I couldn't catch my breath. I tried not to make any sounds and hoped the police would arrive quickly. A few moments later, I saw Mike getting back in his car, but he didn't drive off and continued lingering outside my house. After what felt like an eternity, I saw the flashing lights of a police car pull up. 2 officers approached Mike's car while I watched from the window. There was a brief exchange of words, and then one of the officers came to my door to ensure I was okay and to take a statement. I told them that he knocked on my door and that he was doing something at the back door as well. They said that when they questioned him, he told them that he was waiting for another pickup order and didn't want to drive around wasting gas. He denied having knocked on my door. They said that they couldn't arrest him, as there was no evidence of wrongdoing, so he just drove off. They said they'd keep a patrol car close by in case he tried anything. After the police left, I double-checked all the locks in the house and tried to calm down. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched and the fear that he might come back. I texted Isabel to let her know what happened and that I was safe, and she offered to come over, but I didn't want her going out again on such a stormy night. I hardly slept that night, jumping at every sound. The next day, I contacted Uber to report the incident. They were apologetic and promised to investigate. My parents cut their vacation short, and came home after I told them what had happened. I don't know what his plan was had I opened the door and fallen for his lie, but I'm sure glad that I didn't. I still haven't received a response from Uber, but I definitely hope that they ban him from the service. After graduating high school, I worked as a pizza delivery driver in a small town. It was my first serious job, and I enjoyed it for the most part. One rainy night, close to midnight, I got an order for a delivery to a remote area on the outskirts of town. It was my last delivery of the night, and the rain was pouring down heavily, making it hard to see the road. I picked up the pizza from the restaurant and started making my way to the address. I hadn't made any deliveries to that part of town before, so I didn't know the area well. After wandering around in the rain for a while, I found the address. It was an old house at the end of a long, winding driveway surrounded by tall trees. The house looked abandoned. The paint was peeling, and the front yard was overgrown. I thought maybe I had the wrong address, but double-checked the order, and it was correct. I got out of the car with the pizza and walked up to the front door. As I approached, I noticed that one of the windows was broken. The place gave off a creepy vibe, but I figured maybe the house was being renovated. I knocked a few times, but there was no answer. I was just about to leave when the door slowly creaked open. A man stood in the doorway. He looked to be in his 50s with scuffed-up clothes and a long beard.
Hi there, sorry to keep you waiting.
He said. "No problem, here is your order," I replied, handing the boxed pizza over to him. He looked down at my hands but didn't take the box from me and just stood there for a few seconds. I felt a bit awkward and asked if there was a problem. He smiled and said,
Do you mind putting it on the living room table inside? My hands are dirty and I don't want to touch it.
I looked behind him, but there were no lights on in the house. It seemed like there was no power at all. There was a dim light coming from what I assumed was the living room where he wanted me to leave the pizza. I didn't feel comfortable going inside, but I also didn't want to be rude. It felt a bit strange that he didn't want to touch the box. It's not like he would be dirtying the pizza inside anyway. Feeling a mix of unease and obligation, I hesitantly stepped into the house. The man led the way to the living room, which was lit by a single flickering candle. I placed the pizza on an old, dust-covered table.
Just there is fine, thank you,
the man said, as he reached into his pocket and took out a big wad of cash. He paid me for the pizza and then gave me a single $100 bill as a tip.
For your trouble,
he said with an odd-looking smile on his face. I thanked him, and as I turned to leave, he spoke up again.
Do you mind giving me a hand with something down in the basement? It would only take a moment,
he said while pointing to the opened basement door. I glanced over, but it was pitch black, and I didn't feel comfortable going down there at all, despite the big tip he gave me. Sorry, but I really must get going. Thank you once again for the generous tip, I replied, while making my way back toward the front door. Suddenly, I heard footsteps coming from inside the basement. Someone else was in there and was now coming up the stairs. As I looked at the dark, open basement door, a figure of another man appeared, with what looked like a small axe in his hand. I panicked and started sprinting outside toward my car. I heard someone yelling for me to stop, but without turning around, I got into my car and drove off out of there. As I drove away, my heart was racing and my hands were shaking. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone chasing after me, but there was only darkness and the pouring rain. I didn't slow down until I was well away from that house and back on the main road. When I got back to the pizza place, I told my boss about the delivery. He was concerned and suggested we call the police to check it out, just to be safe. I agreed, feeling it was the right thing to do. The police went to the house later that night. They found it empty, with no sign of the two men or any foul play. They did find the pizza, still on the table, untouched. They told us that the house had been abandoned for years, and no one should have been there. In hindsight, I should have never entered the house. I'm just glad that I got away unharmed, as the night could have turned out a lot worse for me. I'd been working the night shift at a small gas station off a quiet highway for a few months. It was usually uneventful, just me and the occasional late-night customer. But one particular night, something happened that shook me to my core. It was a cold and rainy November evening. The kind of night where the cold seems to seep into your bones. Hours passed without a single customer. I passed the time cleaning shelves and restocking supplies. Around 2 a.m., a car pulled into the station. A man got out wearing a big trench coat. He bought some gas and asked for the restroom key. He was kind of weird about it, touching my hand a bit too long when he gave me the money, but I tried not to think about it too much. He asked for the key to the restroom and headed over there. Seemed like a normal enough interaction, but I felt uneasy. About 15 minutes passed, but he hadn't come back yet, and his car just sat idle at the pump. I considered checking on him, but hesitated. A few more minutes passed, and then, out of nowhere, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the station into darkness. I fumbled for the flashlight under the counter, my heart pounding against my ribs. The darkness felt oppressive, and every instinct screamed at me to stay put, but I had to know if the man was all right. With the flashlight in hand, I slowly made my way to the restroom. The door was slightly open, and the restroom was empty. Then I saw a note on the floor. Just 3 words. "Get out now." My heart skipped a beat. Was this some kind of joke? I wanted to lock myself in the booth and call the cops, but the station's phone was dead and my cell phone was in my car. As I headed back to the booth, I heard a noise from the storage room. Sounded like someone dragging something heavy. Every instinct told me not to open that door, but I had to know. Slowly, I pushed the door open. The sight before me was horrifying. Lying on the floor was the man from earlier, motionless, with a deep gash on his head. Standing next to him was another man, dragging a large bag. Our eyes met, and for a split second, everything froze. Then he charged at me, holding what looked like a metal pipe in his hand. Adrenaline kicked in, and I ran as fast as I could out of the back exit. I made it to my car, locked the doors, and drove off. In the rearview mirror, I saw the man stop in the middle of the road, watching as I escaped into the night. I didn't stop driving until I reached the nearest town, where I called the police. They arrived quickly, but found no one at the gas station. The police speculated it was a robbery attempt gone wrong, and I had inadvertently interrupted it. In the following days, I couldn't shake off the terror of that night. I kept replaying the events in my head, each detail etched vividly in my memory. The police never found the men, unfortunately. I quit the job soon after. The fear of what might have happened if I hadn't escaped haunted me for a long time. I started avoiding being out alone at night, as the sense of safety I once felt had completely eroded. About a year ago, I was living in an old house on the outskirts of town. It was a farmhouse, a bit isolated from the rest of the houses in the area, but still a very nice house. It was an inheritance left by my grandparents. When I got a steady job, I finally decided to move out and put a deposit down on a new house and rent out the old one. I made some renovations and put it up for rent. As soon as I did, one of my friends told me that I could make a lot more money if I rented out on Airbnb. I was skeptical at first, but then I decided to try it out. The first few months were going good. I had a few minor issues with damaged furniture and appliances, but things were mostly fine. One day, the house was booked by what I believed to be a young couple. Most of the time, the house was booked by couples anyway, who wanted a getaway from the noise in the city. There was also a nearby pine forest with nice scenery, and people often went on hikes there. Anyway, the couple booked the house for 2 nights and messaged me that they would arrive sometime in the evening. I had a lockbox set up with the keys inside, so that I don't have to go and hand over the keys every time someone wanted to check in. I gave them the address and code for the lockbox, then messaged them to let me know if there are any issues once they arrive. On the evening of their arrival, I received a message saying that they checked in and everything was in order. It was around 9 p.m. at the time. I was happy that there were no issues and went about my evening. A few hours later, right before I was about to go to bed, my phone buzzed. It was a message from the couple saying that a fuse had blown and the power is out in the house. They asked me if I could come and change the fuse, as they were not comfortable staying in the house without power. It was cold and rainy that night, so I didn't want to leave them without power. I got dressed, got in my car, and started driving to the house. On the way there, my phone buzzed again. It was another message from the couple saying that the roof had started leaking. This was odd, as I had the house renovated recently and regularly checked in on it after people booked it to make sure everything was in order. I told them that I was already on my way and would arrive shortly. When I approached the house, I didn't see any lights on inside, and there were no cars parked out front. I went up to the door and knocked. I waited for a few seconds, but nobody answered. I took out my spare key and tried unlocking the door, but it was already unlocked. I went inside and called out, "Hello, I'm here for the blown fuse." I tried switching on the lights, but there really was no power in the house. I took my phone out and tried calling the couple. Nobody picked up. I used my phone as a torch and went around the house to check if anyone was in there. I checked out all the rooms, but there was no baggage left in the house, except for what looked like a few scattered black empty trash bags in the living room, which were definitely not mine. I went outside and looked at the lockbox, but it hadn't been opened and the key was still inside it. I went down to the basement to look at the fuse box, to see why there was no power. When I looked at it, it appeared that the main switch was off. Just when I was about to flip it back on, I heard a thump coming from upstairs. I froze for a second and turned the flashlight on my phone off. I stayed still and listened for a couple of minutes. The silence was broken by my phone buzzing. I looked at it, and it was a message from the couple. It read, "We are upstairs." I flipped the main fuse switch and the power was now on. I went up the stairs, and as I opened the basement door, I noticed in the corner of my eye a man standing at the end of the hallway. I turned around and looked at him. He was standing about 20 feet from me. He looked to be in his mid-40s. He had water dripping from his clothes and an empty look in his eyes. "Hi, I turned the power back on. It was just a tripped switch," I said. He looked at me and didn't say anything. "Can you show me where the leak is?" I asked. Once again, there was no response. I started to feel really unsettled. He stared at me for a few seconds. Just when I was about to speak again, he started running towards me. I freaked out and ran towards the front door. I managed to get outside and went towards my car, then got in and locked it just in time. He caught up to me and started banging on my window and pulling the door handle. I was panicking by that point, so I took my keys out, started the car, and reversed out of there. I called the police immediately and explained the situation. Once they arrived, I received a call saying that the house was empty and that they couldn't find anyone. I went back to the house and gave a statement. I checked around the house while the police were still there. and I noticed that one of the knives was missing from the kitchen, as well as the black trash bags, which I had seen earlier in the living room. The next day, I found out that the credit card which was used to pay for the house was reported stolen. I don't know who that man was, or why he was trying to lure me to the house and then chased me down, but I got really lucky that I escaped unharmed. The following days, I took the house off of Airbnb and changed the locks. Later on, I decided to sell it, as I always feared that the man might come back. It was a regular Friday evening, and my roommates were all away for the weekend. I'd decided to stay back and enjoy some quiet time. I lived in a 2-story suburban house that we shared together. I'd had a long week, so I just wanted to sit back, eat some popcorn, and watch a movie before I went to bed. I made my popcorn, sat on the couch, and started watching my movie. The sound of rain outside provided the perfect backdrop to the thriller I was watching. The atmosphere was eerie, but I was enjoying the solitude. Halfway through the movie, I thought I heard a noise coming from outside the house. It sounded like a scraping noise coming from the outside wall. I paused my movie and listened carefully, but it stopped. I resumed watching, and a few minutes later I heard what sounded like tapping on the back door of the house. I started to get creeped out, so I paused the movie once again and went to the back door to check what's going on. I got there and looked through a window in the kitchen. I couldn't see anything, other than rain falling down. I thought that it must be the rain, or I'm hearing something from the movie and thinking that it's coming from outside, so I went back and continued watching. For the rest of the movie, I didn't hear any other weird sounds. Once it ended, I turned off the TV and went upstairs to brush my teeth and get ready for bed. While doing so, I heard a sound coming from the back door again. It was similar to the scraping sound I had heard the first time. I quickly ran to the nearest window, which overlooked that part of the backyard, but I didn't see anything once again. I figured it must be branches hitting the house from the wind. I wasn't the sort of person to scare easily, but I had an eerie feeling that night. I went to bed and turned on a small fan to block out any other sounds. I couldn't fall asleep for a while, but I was really tired, and about an hour afterwards, I dozed off. I don't know how long I had been sleeping for, but I woke up in the middle of the night to grab a drink of water. As I got up from my bed, I looked at the door. There was a figure standing in the doorway, watching me. I screamed, and whoever it was took off down the stairs and through the back door. My heart was pounding, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. I took my phone from the nightstand and dialed 911. I stood frozen in my bed, just looking at the door while staying on the line with the dispatcher. I prayed that whoever it was wouldn't come back. The police arrived pretty quickly, but those few minutes felt like hours. The officers searched the house but found no one. They assured me they'd patrol the area throughout the night and advised me to stay with a friend or family member. As I left the house, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The intruder remained a mystery, but the very real fear I had felt that night still haunted me. To this day, I still think about how long he was watching me for, before I woke up, and what he planned to do if I hadn't. I was 19 when I started working as a pizza delivery driver. It was a pretty straightforward job, but one delivery still haunts me to this day. I remember it was a slow Tuesday night when an order came in for a delivery to a hotel on the edge of town. I'd heard stories about this place, a seedy, rundown spot known for its shady guests. It was a rainy winter night, and I had just recently acquired my license, so I drove slowly. I arrived at the place sometime after. The hotel looked even worse up close, with its flickering neon sign and grimy windows. I hesitated for a moment in the parking lot, taking a deep breath before heading inside. The lobby was dimly lit, with a musty smell that made me wrinkle my nose. I told the bored-looking clerk the room number, and he just jerked his thumb towards the stairs without a word. Climbing the creaky stairs, I could hear muffled voices and the sound of a TV blaring from one of the rooms. I finally reached the right room and knocked, balancing the pizza box in my hand. An older man, maybe in his 60s, opened the door. He was wearing a stained wife beater and had a leering smile that made my skin crawl. I handed the pizza box over to him, but he didn't take it. Instead, he stepped back and gestured for me to come in.
Why don't you come in? Come on in, don't be shy,
he said, his voice oily and unsettling. There was no way I was getting inside. I looked inside and there was a young boy about 16 sitting on the edge of the bed. He was shirtless and looked as uncomfortable as I felt.
Meet Luke. I bet you two would be really, really good friends.
Alarm bells were ringing in my head. Everything about this situation screamed danger. I took a step back, shaking my head. I told him that I couldn't go inside, as it was against hotel policy. The man frowned, his eyes narrowing. He rummaged in his pocket and pulled out some crumpled bills, handing them to me. I gave him the pizza, our fingers brushing briefly, and I suppressed a shudder. As I turned to leave, I glanced at the boy again. His eyes met mine, and there was a silent plea in them that I couldn't ignore. I felt a knot of worry in my stomach, but what could I do? I was just a pizza delivery girl. Back in my car, I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. I kept thinking about the boy in that room. I should have done something, said something, but fear had rooted me to the spot. When I got back, I told my manager about the delivery. I don't know if it was concern for the boy or just to cover himself, but he called the police. I don't know what happened after that, but I hope they checked on the boy. I asked my manager what happened a few days later, but he said that he never received a call back from an officer. I sincerely hope that everything was okay, even though I have a strong feeling that it wasn't. One of my hobbies is playing and collecting vintage guitars. One day I was browsing Craigslist and stumbled upon an ad for a vintage Fender Stratocaster at a very decent price. The seller, a guy named Rick, lived in a nearby town, about an hour from mine. We discussed the details and he suggested we meet up halfway between us at a self-service gas station. I agreed that it was fair for both of us, as neither of us wanted to drive far in case the deal fell through. He said he worked late, so the earliest he could make it to the gas station was around 8 p.m. I agreed, and on the day of the meeting, I made my way there. It was a cold, rainy evening, and I arrived a few minutes early, excited for the deal. 8 o'clock rolled in, but there was no sign of Rick. I called him, and he said he was running late, so he'd be here in 10 to 15 minutes. I was starting to have doubts whether this deal was in fact too good to be true. About 20 minutes later, an old pickup truck rolled into the gas station. An older guy, maybe in his 60s, got out and approached my car. I got out and introduced myself. "Hi, are you Rick?"
I sure am. Sorry for my late arrival. Come over to the truck to check out the guitar.
I went over. The guitar was in its case, and as Rick opened it, I felt a surge of excitement. It looked authentic, but as I examined it more closely, something felt off. The wear on the guitar seemed artificially aged, and the serial number was missing. Doubt crept in, and I started questioning Rick about the guitar's history. His attitude shifted. He became evasive, and he started looking around nervously. Sensing something was wrong, I decided to back out of the deal. "Sorry, but I don't think this guitar is genuine. I'm not interested." As I was putting the guitar back in its case, Rick swiftly pulled out a taser. Before I could react, he hit me with it, sending a jolt of electricity through my body. I fell to the ground, disoriented and temporarily paralyzed. Rick rifled through my jacket, taking my wallet and phone. With my belongings in his hand, he hopped back into his truck and drove off into the rain, leaving me lying there. I laid on the ground, with the rain pouring over me, thinking to myself what an idiot I was for believing this could be legit. A minute or so later, I slowly got back up on my feet, still shaking and aching all over. I made my way back to my car, but I was in no condition to drive yet. I got in and just sat there, no phone, and no way to contact anyone. A few minutes later, a car pulled in to refill. A woman got out. I explained what happened and asked if I could use her phone to call the police. The police arrived sometime later with an ambulance. The officers asked me a series of questions, gathering as much information as they could about Rick and his truck. The paramedics checked me over, ensuring that I hadn't sustained any serious injuries from the taser. They offered to take me to the hospital, but I declined, feeling more bruised and shaken than anything else. The officers told me that this kind of scam wasn't unheard of. Criminals often use valuable items like vintage guitars as bait to lure in victims. They advised that in the future, I should insist on public, well-lit places for such transactions, and if possible, bring someone with me. After the police took my statement, one of the officers drove me home. The ride was quiet, and my mind replayed the night's events. I felt a mix of anger and embarrassment. I had been so excited about the guitar that I had ignored the potential risks. Over the next few days, I kept in touch with the police, but there were no significant updates. I didn't take a look at his license plate, and my description of him wasn't a lot to go on. I began to accept that I might never get my belongings back or see Rick brought to justice. Working as an Uber driver on the night shift had its ups and downs. I enjoyed the peacefulness of the city at night, and driving around was a way for me to relieve stress. One rainy night a few months back, though, an experience turned my usual shift into something out of a horror movie. The night started like any other. The rain was pouring down, creating a steady rhythm on the roof of my car. I liked driving in the rain. It made the city feel different, more intimate. I picked up a few passengers, mostly people heading home from late shifts or night outs. It was close to 3 a.m. when I got a ride request from a part of town known for its nightlife. I made my way to the address and pulled up to the curb. A man jumped in, soaking wet from the rain. He was wearing a hoodie and kept his head down, so I couldn't see his face clearly.
Just drive,
he said, his voice tense. I started the ride, trying to make small talk, but he wasn't interested. He just pointed forward and told me to keep going. Something about him made me uneasy, but I figured he was just having a rough night. As we drove, he became more agitated. He started shifting in his seat, glancing around nervously. I asked him if everything was okay, but he just grunted in response. That's when I noticed we were heading towards a more secluded part of town, away from the main streets. Suddenly he leaned forward and said in a low voice,
"Pull over here."
I complied, pulling into a dark, deserted alley. My heart started racing. This didn't feel right. Before I could say anything, he pulled out a knife and held it to my throat.
"Give me all your money,"
he yelled. I froze, the cold blade pressing against my skin. I had never been so scared in my life. I told him I didn't carry much cash, that everything was done through the app. He rifled through my pockets, finding only a few dollars and my phone. He snatched the money and threw the phone on the floor of the car.
"Get out,"
he ordered. I didn't hesitate. I got out of the car, my legs shaking. He slid into the driver's seat and sped off, leaving me alone in the rain-soaked alley. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Then I ran to the nearest street, waving down a passing car. The driver, seeing my state, called the police for me. The police arrived quickly, but my car was long gone. I gave them all the details, and one of the officers drove me home. They said they'd do their best, but I knew the chances of catching him were slim. The next few days were hard. I kept thinking about what I could have done differently, how I could have prevented it. Luckily, they found my car and arrested the guy who robbed me. He was wanted for parole violation and had a hefty criminal history of robberies and assault. I managed to get my car back, but the experience definitely left a scar on my psyche. I stopped driving for Uber after that. I couldn't bring myself to get behind the wheel at night again. Back when I was still in high school, there was an abandoned old school near where I lived. The place was straight out of a ghost story, with the windows all boarded up and doors bolted shut. It looked like no one had set foot in there for ages. My friend Jake and I would always dare each other to go check it out, but we never did, until one rainy day, when we finally decided to do it. We were on summer break and had nothing better to do, so we packed some snacks and some drinks, and we started heading there. As we were getting there, a thunderstorm came in out of nowhere, but it didn't bother us. It actually made the idea of exploring the place that more exciting. We scoped out the school and found this old pipe running alongside the wall. It was pretty sturdy, probably used for maintenance back in the day, so we climbed it. We made it up to the roof and slipped through a window that someone must have pried open a while back. The inside was just as creepy as you'd imagine. Peeling paint, desks turned over, and graffiti all over. Every step we took, the floor creaked and groaned like it was telling us to get out. We had our phone lights on and started exploring around. The creepiest part was the basement. It was flooded and the stairs just disappeared under the water. It was like something out of a movie, seeing those stairs leading down into nothing. Jake dared me to go down, but no way was I touching that water. We poked around for a while, and just as we got into the gym, we heard footsteps coming from the doors on the other side of the gym. They were slow and heavy, like someone was taking their time, stopping and starting. It was weird because it sounded like just one person, not a bunch of kids messing around like us. Whoever it was, they were between us and the way we came in. We were trapped, unless we wanted to try and bust through some old boarded-up doors. There was no light coming from that direction, and we couldn't fathom why someone would come into a creepy place like this alone. We froze, trying to be as quiet as possible, holding our breaths and listening hard. When the footsteps stopped, we tiptoed across the gym, hearts racing like crazy. We peeked down the hall, our lights barely cutting through the dark, and saw nothing. We moved, real slow, towards the stairs up to the roof. Then, out of nowhere, we heard the sound of someone sprinting at us from the darkness. It was so sudden, so loud, that we got extremely freaked out. We didn't see anything, but we weren't about to wait around either. We dashed up the stairs, taking them two at a time. When we reached the 4th floor, we slammed the door shut and waited, listening. Nothing. No more footsteps, no more running, just silence. We climbed out the window, got back down the pipe, and didn't stop running until we hit the main road. We were out of breath, looking back at the school from a distance, trying to make sense of it all. But the more we thought, the less it made sense. We never figured out what was up with those footsteps or who had been running at us in the pitch dark. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to know. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. We promised each other we'd never go back, and you can bet we kept that promise. Every time I pass that school, I get that icy feeling in my gut, remembering that night. I am a nightscape photographer. I often go out to isolated places away from the light pollution of the city and take photographs of the night sky. It's peaceful, and I enjoy the solitude and quietness of the night. I usually go out during the summer and take pictures of the Milky Way. It's not as cold and the locations are more easily reachable. Also, where I am in the northern hemisphere, the Milky Way is only visible at a certain time of the year. Last winter, though, I decided to change things up and get some winter shots for a calendar I was working on at the time. I thought I'd try and take a photograph of the Orion constellation, which is only visible in the winter. There is a pine forest about 30 minutes away from my house. I went during the day to scout out some locations and make sure there was a trail I could follow near the road. I found a nice path, which led to an opening in the trees, where it looked perfect for me to take my shot. I went home, set up my gear, and waited for night to fall. At around 9 p.m., I packed my bag and left. I got to the location, parked near the trail on the side of the road, and started walking. I had a flashlight with me, so I took it and walked slowly through the snow. On the way, I thought I heard some branches and twigs breaking near me. I pointed my flashlight through the trees, but I didn't see anything. I thought that it's probably just a fox or something. I hadn't heard of bear or wolf sightings in that area, but I always carried a can of pepper spray with me just in case. I continued walking, and a few moments later I was at the location. I started unpacking my gear and setting up my camera when I heard something in the trees once again. This time, I thought I heard footsteps in the snow. I shined my flashlight in that direction and saw a figure of a man walking between the trees in the deep snow. There was nothing out there, and the path was quite far from where he was. When I shined my flashlight on him, the man stopped and turned his back towards me. I felt uncomfortable. The trail I was on wasn't very popular or anything, and it didn't make a lot of sense for someone else to be there at that time of the night. "Hello? How are you this fine evening?" I asked. He didn't reply. He stood there for a few seconds, his back still towards me, then started walking towards the path, in the direction I came from. A few moments later, he disappeared into the darkness. I wasn't thrilled to be there alone at that time of the night, especially knowing that there's someone else around, whose intentions I wasn't sure of. I had expensive camera equipment with me, so I was definitely uncomfortable. I decided to pack up my gear and go back to my car. I made my way back to the path and walked towards my car. As I walked through the snow, I saw the man standing in the middle of the path just ahead of me. This time, he was facing me. I stopped in my tracks and got a chill down my spine. The man was just staring at me, not moving or saying anything. I took the can of pepper spray out of my pocket and held it in my hand, expecting the worst. I had to get by the man in order to get back to my car, so I started walking slowly towards him. As I got closer to him, he put his hands in his pockets and said,
"Out here all by yourself, huh?"
"Yeah, just taking some photos. What brings you here?" I replied. He looked at me with a disturbed look on his face and said,
"I'm looking for my wife. I think she's around here somewhere."
This creeped me out even more. I didn't see any cars near where I parked, and the path started there and ended at the opening in the trees where I was taking photos. "I haven't seen anyone," I replied. He looked down at my hands and saw me holding the can of pepper spray. Then he looked back at me with an angry look on his face. He stood there quiet for a few seconds, then turned around and walked off. I walked back to my car, but I didn't see the man again. I don't know where he went or where he came from. The place was quite isolated, and what made the encounter even creepier was that there was no way for anyone to get there without a car, and I didn't see any cars at all that night. As I drove back home, I couldn't help but wonder what he was planning to do to me that night and why he was really there in the first place. I'm just glad that I got home safely